Hello, and welcome to this week's Ethical Dilemma in Science, where we're going to take a look at personal choice or government mandate. Who gets to decide if your next vehicle is gas or electric? Now, the goal of these weekly ethical dilemmas in science is to take a look at current events in an effort to understand the science and technology involved, as well as the societal and ethical implications. So for this week, where we're taking a look at who gets to decide whether your next car is going to be gas or electric, it starts out in California in the summer of 2022, where the legislature and then Governor signed a law which is going to require the phase out of gas cars and the implementation and sale of new cars completely by 2035. Now, soon after California implemented this law, a number of states, including New York, implemented a similar law, again, outlawing or basically eliminating the sale of gas cars and then promoting the sale of electric cars by 2035. Now, in response to those laws that are promoting the sale of electrical cars and ultimately the elimination of gas cars by 2035, a number of states have responded to that negatively. An example of that is within New York State in the lead up to the election in 2022. A number of GOP representatives, as well as other officials and individuals, are against this shift from gas to electric. Notably, in the article here from October 2022, a number of politicians are attacking the law, eliminating the sale of gas cars and promoting the sale of electric cars by 2035 because it eliminates or denies New Yorkers the right to choose whether or not they have a gas or electric vehicle. Now, in a similar vein, in the state of Wyoming in January 2023, a representative in the state legislature has proposed a bill banning the sale of electric cars and limiting the sale of electric cars by 2035. So basically the exact opposite of what we're seeing in California and New York. Now, when the legislator was asked why they were going to ban the sale of electric cars, their response is that they were acting in the interests of their constituents, the citizens of the state of Wyoming, and in order to protect the oil and gas production industry and jobs within Wyoming. So in order to understand what is the issue around gas vehicles and electric vehicles, if we take a look at them, pretty much the majority of the vehicle is going to be exactly the same. The same type of tires, the same type of drivetrain, the transmission and the axles. In reality, the same type of body as well. The only difference, or at least the main difference, is going to be the source of propulsion, the power that moves the car forward. And so what we see here is an example of an electric motor. And so we have a situation where we have a battery which has been charged up and stored, ideally charged up at home, at a charging station, or out in the community in a location like the equivalent of a gas station, but an electric charging location in a parking lot someplace. Once that battery has been charged, as the driver pushes down on the throttle, the accelerator, the gas pedal, I guess we need a new name for the gas pedal, but basically pushes down with that allows electricity to flow into this electric motor. It does some kind of technical, kind of physics type things, but basically uses the properties of electricity and magnetism to cause this shaft to turn. And as this shaft turns, it in turn is going to power the transmission, and the transmission will power the wheels and allow the vehicle to move forward. Now, the issue with electric vehicles is that these batteries have to be recharged, and so they have to have a source of electricity to charge them. And so that's one of the concerns, the limited kind of battery size which is available. Now, the alternative to an electric motor is the internal combustion engine, the engine that we have in gasoline-operated cars. And again, this image represents what's going to be occurring. And so in this chamber up here, we mix gasoline fumes as well as oxygen. The spark plug fires, and that basically causes the gasoline to explode. When the gasoline explodes, it pushes down on this piston, which in turn, as it is going up and down, is going to turn this camshaft, or this crankshaft as it's sometimes called. What this is going to do is basically turn a rod, and in that rod it's going to turn the transmission, as well as the transmission then turning the wheels and allowing the car to go forward. Now, the main concern, or at least one of the major concerns with internal combustion engines, is the waste products from the explosion, from the burning of the gasoline up here. And so we can see the exhaust being eliminated from the chamber over here as the cycle is being repeated. Okay, so if we focus in then on the vehicular emissions, basically the exhaust fumes that are coming out from a gasoline-powered automobile, we can see that there's a lot of discussions associated with carbon dioxide emissions. And so we can see kind of the equivalent of air pollution coming out of a poorly maintained vehicle right now. What we can see, and these are 2022 statistics, so roughly a year old, is that an average vehicle, a pickup truck in this case, traveling 15,000 kilometers, and so 15,000 kilometers is basically about 9,000 miles, is going to produce about 3,510 kilograms of carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide has been recognized as a gas that accumulates within the environment, and it's within that category of greenhouse gases, which has the effect of trapping heat in the atmosphere and contributing to a warming of the climate. And as we can see on this image here from Statista, smaller vehicles and other types of vehicles have differing, and in many cases, lower amounts of carbon dioxide emissions associated with it. In addition to the concerns with the carbon dioxide emissions coming out of a gasoline-powered car, again, like we've got illustrated over here, there have been identified a number of both short-term and longer-term health effects associated with exposure to the chemicals, or basically, if you want to think about it, the pollutants that are coming out of a gasoline-powered emission, the exhaust that is coming out. And these can have very long-lasting effects on individuals, including things like triggering bronchitis, making things like asthma worse, causing breathing problems, as well as kind of long-term effects, including impacts on the respiratory system, the cardiovascular system, as well as impacts on the liver, and a variety of other systems as well. Now, in response to the recognition of the air pollution coming out of vehicles in the 1960s and early 1970s, the government formed the Environmental Protection Agency and enacted the Clean Air Act. And now, as a goal of the Clean Air Act, it was to reduce air pollution. And so we can see, as illustrated here in this graphic that is coming from the EPA itself, the cars in the early 1970s were basically really good at producing pollution. Over the last 50-some years, what we've seen is that the emissions have become a lot cleaner because of the result of government requirements and mandates. So an example of this, and we can see it here on this slide, taking a look at lead used in the gasoline in blue. And so this is basically the total lead used per 6-month period in 10 to the third, or basically 1,000 tons. And so starting in the 1970s, going up to the 1980s, we can see that the EPA was phasing out the use of lead in the gasoline in the early 1970s, and it was prohibited, lead gasoline was prohibited after 1995. This resulted in a fairly significant decrease in the amount of lead that was within the air, and as we can see here in this red, these red circles, the average blood lead levels in individuals that are breathing in the air. and recognize lead is an incredible toxin, an incredible neurotoxin, and basically any amount of lead in the body is going to have harmful effects. And so in this case, we can see that the EPA had a very effective decrease in the amount of lead in individuals, in human blood, by removing lead from the gasoline. Now, in this slide, we can take a look at a number of the different factors that are found within an automobile exhaust. And again, starting here in 1985, extending out to 2020 at this point, projecting forward to 2030 at this point, we can see that a number of these chemicals, and basically you can recognize them as these different lines, they're things like carbon dioxide, which is the darker blue line up here, but other things like carbon monoxide, methane, nitric oxide, as well as particulate matter and sulfates, have all decreased very dramatically over the last 30, 40, 50 years as a result of these requirements to clean up the emissions or the exhaust that's coming from a gasoline-powered vehicle. So in this image from the New England Journal of Medicine editorial from 2015, we can see the impact of these EPA mandates in improving air quality by reducing the pollutants within emissions from automobiles. We can see the smog kind of obscuring the Los Angeles skyline in the late 1980s, and then being relatively clear here in 2014. And so we can see a fairly dramatic effect by reducing the emissions, reducing the pollutants produced by these gasoline-powered vehicles, by improving the quality of gasoline, by improving the gasoline mileage of vehicles, by basically cleaning the pollutants that are coming out of the emission system, the exhaust system within vehicles. So we've made great progress. Now, the goal of many efforts to move from a gasoline-powered engine to an electric-powered engine is to continue the reduction in both air pollution as well as these greenhouse gases. Now, with any technological change, you are going to see a change in the workforce that's associated with it. Any implementation of new science and new technology is going to result in a change within the infrastructure. And so, again, like we saw within Wyoming, there was concern that the shift away from gasoline-powered vehicles, a shift away from the need for gasoline and fossil fuels, is going to affect a number of individuals. Within Wyoming, it's affecting the oil and gas workers, extending that out. It's going to have an impact on the transportation system, and so truck drivers that are driving these tanker trucks and delivering gasoline to our local gas stations, as well as our local gas stations as well. Our gas stations, our infrastructure has built up to support an automotive society, to promote the ability of an individual to get in their car, to drive around, and very easily be able to refill their car with gas and be able to drive around some more. Any change away from using a gas-powered vehicle is going to impact these individuals within society and result in a need for change in the infrastructure and a change in how it is that we're going to be supporting the transportation of individuals. Now, according to the Brookings Institute in a recent study, there's approximately 1.7 million people working within the United States right now within the fossil fuel industry. And so that would include individuals working in oil and gas and coal operations, as well as connected industry. So people working in refineries where they're basically distilling the crude oil into kind of specific purified gasoline that we can burn within our cars, pipeline workers, as well as individuals like the truck drivers and gas station attendants that we identified on the previous slide. Now the IEA is moving forward with reports indicating that as we make these clean energy transitions, we need to be intentional. We need to be looking at retraining the workforce and making sure that those individuals are going to have jobs available to them as they move away from the fossil fuel industry and move towards these clean energy types. Now, for the purposes of this argument, as we're making a potential shift from the infrastructure supporting gasoline-powered engines, a gasoline station, basically almost on any corner, or at least within pretty much every community around most of the United States, and even in remote communities, access to gasoline in some way. We need to change that if we go to an electric vehicle, because we know that these electric vehicles are going to have a limited battery size and a need to recharge those batteries on extended trips away from home. And so we need to implement electric vehicle charging stations. Now, I hope that we don't use that as an argument against the implementation of new technologies, because we can see from historical evidence, just the fact, all of us, or many of us, have a cell phone of some type that allows us to communicate without being wired to our home, without a phone hooked to a wire, hooked to the wall within our house. And this is technology that's emerged over the last 40 years. And so, again, this is a slide looking at cell phone technology, but emphasizing the fact that new technologies require the infrastructure to support them. But if there is a need, if there are individuals pursuing this, there is going to be the infrastructure built. So in 1984, the first mobile cell phone started with just voice only at an incredibly slow speed. And over the last 40 years, we've gone through a number of generations of cell phone technology to the point where you could potentially watch this video on your phone right now without having to download it over minutes or hours or days over a dial-up service. So you have the ability to do streaming in an incredible way. You can move around outside of your home, out in, basically in nature. And in most regions, except for the most remote regions of the country, the United States, you're going to have decent cell phone coverage. And so this is showing that, if there is a need to build an infrastructure for that new technology, society is going to respond to that. And we're going to see that new technology going along and being supported by the necessary infrastructure. So this gives rise to our ethical dilemma in science this week. Who gets to decide if your next car is gas or electric? So who decides if your next car is gas or electric? Is it the federal government acting through an agency like the Environmental Protection Agency, which we'd seen doing great improvement at the reduction of air pollution coming from the exhaust of vehicles? Do we allow that to be a decision by state governments that are working in the interests of their constituents? And so, take a look at that. Are those constituents the individuals within the state, or is it the corporations, the industry? If we're taking a look at the coal industry, or the natural gas industry, or the oil production industry. And so they, are faced with a quandary, faced with a decision as to whether or not they act for individuals or act for corporations. Is the decision, or should that decision be available to those individuals making a decision? Do I want to buy a gasoline-powered car, or do I want to buy an electric car? Is it based on my view on my impact on society, my impact on the environment? Is it a factor of how much I can afford or what I can finance through my bank? Who gets to make that decision? Is it a decision that is open and available? Is there a choice to be made, or is the choice being made for us? What criteria should be used in making a decision about what types of cars are encouraged or required? Is it a factor of personal convenience? Is it societal impact, whether that societal impact will impact on jobs or make potentially add to or remove air pollution from our atmosphere? Or should there be other criteria? And if there should be other criteria, what types of criteria should they be? So thank you for listening to this week's Ethical Dilemma in Science. As always, you can see the description below for additional information and references. Thank you, and have a great week.